Hi, my name is Mon, and this is my slideshow presentation about famous figures and baby name trends. I have a panoply of names that we're going to look at, and we're going to see how famous people or fictional characters have impacted the popularity of that name relative to when they were famous. I'm using Social Security Administration data from 1880 to 2023. If you go on their website, you can see the top 1,000 names, but I have made an Excel sheet that has the data containing every name with 5 or more occurrences for all of those 143 years. Quick introduction, I do have a previous video where I looked at fictional characters and their impacts on name trends, and I also have another video where I was looking at like numbers just in general, not really names, but like names as a whole, the whole data set. But I just have so much fun looking up names and trying to find correlations and stuff that I'm making another video, but I'm including some real people this time. So some of these names are me thinking of like a real or a fictional person and looking up their name to see if there was an impact, but others are me looking up a name, seeing some sort of sharp increase and trying to find an impact. So as a result, I've split this slideshow into, actually it's 4 sections, but the first section we're going to skip over. But the last 2 sections are positive trends, negative trends, and unknown triggers. Also, all name meanings are taken from behindthename.com. It's my favorite name website. So the first section, even I got bored of making this one, but I was looking at all the US presidents who served after 1880, looking for if their first name had an impact, but that was kind of boring, honestly. But there are three. There are three that had quite a big impact, and I just want to look at those three. I mean, the presidents without X's, these are the ones that actually could be considered. First is Grover. So Grover Cleveland is the only president to serve non-consecutively as the 22nd and the 24th president. His first election was 1884, and so if we look at 1883 to 1884, there was a 531.5% increase. And if we look at the second time he ran and won, it was a 178% increase. I don't really know what this was. Next is Woodrow Wilson, who was the 28th president of the United States. He served 2 consecutive terms. The first election was the 1912 election, and so if we look from 1911 to 1912, there was a 1,423.1% increase. And the second election was 1916, where there was just a 35.7% increase, but by that point, he was already president, he was already pretty well known, so it wouldn't have been as big of an increase. Okay, it's not Kennedy because he actually had very little impact. The reason Kennedy is such a popular female name is because of an MTV commentator named Kennedy. She caused a 3,355.3% increase during her time on MTV. But the other president is Barack Obama. He was the 43rd president and the first Black president of the United States. And so the first year with any Baracks was 2007 with 5. And the percent increase from 2007 to 2008, which is when he was elected, yields a 940% increase. The second election year, 2012, is a 6.7% increase. It literally went up by 1. Anyway, let's start looking at all the positive trends. This is most of them. I only have like 5 negative trend ones. So just note, when I say positive trends, I'm referring to the trends caused by people that cause an increase in the number of babies given that name. The person or thing may have had a negative impact, but the trend is positive, and it's the opposite with negative trend. There was a decrease in the number of babies given that name, whether the thing can be considered positive or negative. Anyway, the first name is Margot. And so if you were around in 2023, you probably remember Barbenheimer, which was when the movies Barbie and Oppenheimer opened on the same day. So in 2023, the name Margot saw an increase, likely after the name of the actor who portrayed Barbie, Margot Robbie. Also, Barbie saw a slight decrease in 2023. However, Barbie is not often, it's very uncommon. It's not often a given name because Barbie is a diminutive of Barbara. Margot is a diminutive of Margaret. I believe it's the French diminutive, and Margaret is a Greek name that means pearl. You know, obviously Margot's been increasing in the last few years. It's at the most popular it's ever been, but from 2021 to 2022, it went down just a little bit. However, in 2023, it went up 26.3%, which might not be that high, but it is pretty noticeable compared to the last 2 years. And obviously, if we look at Margot, we gotta look at Cillian, who portrayed Oppenheimer in the movie Oppenheimer. He was also on Peaky Blinders for a few years before that. I did look up the name Oppenheimer. Luckily, it had no data. Cillian is an Irish name, meaning church. This one actually has a pretty similar upward trend, kind of starting in the mid-2000s, increasing throughout the 2010s, slowing down from 2021 to 2022, and then increasing 25.6% in 2023. So while Margot is a much more common name, the percent increases of these two names are actually quite similar. All right, going back in time a little bit, Shirley Temple was a child actress known for her 1930s movies that were often #1 in the box office. And in 1934, her movie Stand Up and Cheer was released and it launched her into stardom, and she acted until 1950. Shirley comes from an English surname and means bright clearing. And so the percent increase from 1933 to 1935 yields a 195.8% increase. Additionally, the name Shirley got so popular in this short amount of time that it actually became the number 2 name. Obviously, Mary was number 1. It's hard to beat Mary back in those days, but it did get insanely popular for like 1 year or like 2 years. These next two you probably come across if you've ever watched stuff on YouTube, but one half of the duo from Good Mythical Morning, GMM, is Rhett McLaughlin. GMM began in 2012, but they had been making videos long before that. And Rhett is the anglicized version of a Dutch surname meaning advice. Now this is a little hard to calculate because it started in 2012. There were already doing stuff before that. It's still happening. But if we look at 2011 to this peak up here, which is 2021, it is a 467.8% increase. Is that entirely due to him? Maybe not, but I do have a pretty big following compared to some other YouTubers. I just googled famous people named Rhett, and he's literally the only one I know on this list. I don't know what these other people do. Next one you can probably guess is Lincoln. So the other half of GMM is Link Neal, whose full name is Lincoln. And although both Link and Lincoln have similar data trends, this graph is only for Lincoln, which is the more popular of the two. I also chose Lincoln over Link because Link has Zelda connotations, and I didn't want to have to, sort that out. But Lincoln is taken from an English surname from a town name meaning Lake Colony. It's also often given as a tribute, I guess, to Abraham Lincoln, the president. And so similar thing, if we look at the percent increase from 2011 to this peak in 2017, it is a 279.7% increase. Again, is that entirely due to this guy? Probably not, but if we look at these two, okay, well, Rhett was very steadily increasing over time, but I don't know, there's gotta be something here. They've gotta have, I'm willing to bet that these two have some sort of part in the increases we see here. All right, remember when I said that the positive refers to the trend and not the thing? So this name is Lolita, which is the name of a 1955 book by Nabokov. I have not read this book. I heard it is while it is like a wonderfully written book, it is about a pedophile who abducts a 12-year-old girl and bad things happen. It was also made into a 1962 movie, which you can see is where this peak is. This is 1962, and this is the year before and the year after. So Lolita is a diminutive of Lola, which itself is a diminutive of Dolores, which is a Spanish name meaning sorrows and relating to the title of the Virgin Mary. So the percent increase from 1961 to 1963 yields a 254.1% increase. It should be noted that immediately after the book release, the name had a slight decrease. I mean, obviously this name isn't very popular, so the trend is kind of choppy, but it is a bigger dip. But then it kind of continued upward a little bit. It's one of those names where, like, it's a perfectly fine name. If you want to name your kid Lolita these days, the other kids probably won't know about this book. But, like, naming your kid Lolita immediately after the movie comes out, that's a little questionable to me. Next name is Jolene, which is the title of a 1973 song by Dolly Parton. It is a great song. It's about how, like, Jolene stole the singer's man. And Jolene was actually a name created in the early 20th century by combining Jo and the suffix "lean." And you can see right here, it pops up. I'm not sure if this is where 5 would be, but starts in, looks like 1918. It peaked originally around the 50s and it decreases again, but then Jolene, the song stops that decrease by increasing 295.5% in just 1 year. It was released in like November of 1973, so that's why it's like all the way down. And so 1974 is when you get the peak. It didn't really stay popular, it went down again, went up again, did that. Now it's slightly more popular again. On that thread was also Roxanne, referring to the song by the Police. However, when I looked it up, I actually saw this bigger increase in the 50s, and so I looked up Roxanne 1950, and I found this woman, who was the quote-unquote blonde assistant on Beat the Clock, which aired she was the blonde assistant from 1950 to 1955. I don't know why she has a cheetah. Roxanne is actually one of my favorite names just purely from how we get it. So Roxanne, spelled this way, two N's and an E, is a variant of Roxanne with one N and an E, which itself is a variant of Roxana with one N and an A, and Roxana is a Latin form of the Greek form of an old Persian name from an old Iranian word meaning bright. I just love how, like, Roxanne is totally an innocuous name, but it's from an old Iranian word. Anyway, the percent increase from 1949 to 1954 can be calculated to yield a 574% increase. So I think we're going from here, 1949, to here in 1954. Now, I got this from the Reddit thread as well, but they were referring to the song by the Police, And that is right here. It was released in 1978, but if we look at 77 to 79, which is just slightly lower, it's only a 17% increase, so she had much more of an effect than the song by the Police. Next name is Violet, and this is actually one of the first names that really got me into name trends and associations with pop culture, because in 2004, there were two characters named Violet in what you might consider children's media. We had Violet Baudelaire from A Series of Unfortunate Events, specifically the 2004 movie Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events, and Violet Parr from The Incredibles. And these are both, they're both strong young ladies. Violet's very intelligent. I haven't seen The Incredibles in a while, but she overcomes her fears at the end. That's what I remember. For A Series of Unfortunate Events, the first book released in 1999, which is right here. The release of the first book only caused like a 35% increase, which is honestly pretty negligible because it had already kind of started going up a little bit. And the first season of the Netflix series dropped in 2017. Somewhere around here is 2017. The name dipped at first, but then rose again with the following seasons, and The Incredibles 2 released only a year later in the summer of 2018. The name Violet simply refers to the violet flower, but we had those two movies released in 2004. And you can see it was already increasing, but in 2004 it started increasing a lot faster in the following years. And so the percent increase from 2003 to 2016, which is this first peak right here, is a 942.9% increase over 13 years. And the percent increase from 2016 to 2020, which just bookends both The Incredibles 2 and all the seasons of Netflix's series of Unfortunate Events, was only a 4.9% increase. But by that point, Violet had already become a fairly popular name. All right, the next name is Elsa. And I did consider putting this in the negative trends, but I decided not to because this one was actually pretty big jump at first. So obviously, Elsa is the name of the queen in the Disney movie Frozen. The movie was released in 2013 and takes place in the 1840s in Norway. So Elsa is a shorter version of Elizabeth. Technically, it's a shorter version of Elizabeth with an S instead of a Z. But Elizabeth and Elizabeth are like the same name, pretty much. It's the Greek form of a Hebrew name, meaning my God is an oath. Anyway, so the name has been declining in recent years, probably because this movie became so popular that the sole connotation of Elsa is, did they have a last name? This Elsa. And so the percent increase from 2012 to 2014 can be calculated to yield a 110.3% increase. I believe this movie came out towards the end of the year, so you have to look at the year after. But, it declined immediately after that, but it did have a very large increase at first. Another name I looked up was Sharona. I think I also got this one from the Reddit thread. But the song My Sharona was released in June of 1979 and was written by a 25-year-old man about a real 17-year-old girl named Sharona. Sharona is an elaboration of Sharon, a name coming from Hebrew and meaning plain, referring to like the geographic feature or the large flat area of land and not something undecorated. So the percent increase from 1978 to 1980 can be calculated to yield a 450% increase. So we have 78 and 80, which is also the peak. So while this name is an elaboration of Sharon, you do put stress on a different syllable, and so the name Sharon saw no effect at all. It was already trending downwards. So over this past summer, I rewatched the show Scrubs, and I got curious if the character of Elliot Reed, who's a woman, had any impact on female babies named Elliot. So this graph is only showing the female results for Elliot. I got rid of the male results. Elliot comes from a last name that comes from Elias, which is a form of Elijah. That means my God is Yahweh. And so the show started in 2001. So if we look at the year before, so a percent increase from 2000 to 2010 yields a 1,225% increase. And in just the first year of the show, from 2001 to 2002, there was a 163.6% increase. And I mean, obviously, Elliot's much more common as a masculine name. I'm guessing that Elliot Reed definitely has something to do with this sharper increase in the number of girls named Elliot. Next is another one of my favorite names in terms of where we get it from. This is a movie poster for the 1984 movie Splash. I have not seen it, but it is about a mermaid who gets her name from a street sign. And actually, Tom Hanks' character, funnily enough, says Madison isn't a name. I don't know, I found a clip of that part. But Madison comes from a surname and means son of Maud. So the name peaked in 2002 as the #1 girl's name in the United States. And the percent increase from 1984 to 2002 over 18 years yields a 51,740% increase without like ever decreasing. Now it's obviously much more popular as a girl's name because the main character was a girl, but you can see the orange line kind of moving up and down just a little bit before that. And so there was no female data for Madison prior to that movie, but there was a bit of masculine data, probably because Madison is a last name, and sometimes people just name their kid like, I don't know, someone's maiden name or just any last name for whatever reason. But the movie also had an effect on boys. So you can see it was released here in 1984. However, this name peaked in 1995, and the percent increase from 1984 to 2002, if we're looking at the same time frame, it's right here, it was a 147.6% increase, obviously because it only went from here to here. It was never as popular. You can see this goes into the tens of thousands. This only goes up to like 275. I don't know what happened in 2004, but that is very strange to me that I couldn't find anything that would have caused that. Or that. I didn't see that one. All right, another famous person is Britney Spears, who released her first album, Baby One More Time, in 1999. So Britney, spelled Britney, is a variant of Brittany, spelled Brittany, which is a region in France named after the Britons who settled in the area. And was one of the first names I've come across where someone prevented a sharp decline of their name, like an actual person. Jolene did the same thing, but that wasn't a real person. So this is 1998, and this is 2000. So if we look at the percent increase from those years, it is a 321% increase. Now, I thought that because this name increased so sharply, especially like right here, I thought maybe there was someone famous named Britney spelled the traditional way, but there wasn't. The name just increased really fast. And so here's an overlay of those two names. Obviously, the scales are completely different. This spelling's more popular than this one. But you can see the shape is very similar, but only the Britney Spears spelling had an increase in popularity, while the traditional spelling just went downwards. The name Britney, spelled this way, first appeared in 1963, but it quickly rose throughout the 70s. But like nothing really sparked that increase. Okay, then we got Fox Mulder, who was a main character on The X-Files, which aired from late 1993 to early 2002 and had reboot seasons in 2016 and 2018. So I love The X-Files. I've seen it several times, but it's about two FBI agents who investigate like paranormal happenings. Mulder is the believer, and his partner Scully is not. So while his first name is Fox, in the show he's just called Mulder. I think the only people who call him Fox are like his parents. So Fox comes from either the animal or from the last name, which comes from the animal. The percent increase from 1993 to 2002, which is the second line, can be calculated to yield a 2,700% increase. However, I don't know how to do percent increase when the start is like basically zero. As you can see, there are some earlier instances of Fox, but those three are all at 5, which just means in these other years, there were probably a handful of people named Fox. It was just never 5 or more. It was somewhere between 0 and 4. Then the percent increase when the X-Files was not airing was a 1,064.3% increase. Here's season 10. It was like one isolated season. It did not like air for many years, and then there was a second one. However, it peaked in that year, so I'm not sure if the reboot seasons caused it to go down again or if it just had reached its peak and it just naturally went down. But yeah, the reboot seasons had no effects. But it did increase a lot in between there, but I'm not sure if there were other fictional characters or real people named Fox. Okay, I didn't even think to Google famous people named Fox, but I forgot about the actor Jamie Foxx. The Fox is the last name for him, and it's spelled with 2 X's, but I know he was in stuff in between here, like in, I think 2015, he was in that Annie movie, which actually might be right here. This increase might be because of the Annie movie. This is 100% because of Fox Mulder. Can't entirely say that this is. In 2007, the movie Juno was released, about a pregnant teenager named Juno. So Juno has an unknown meaning, but Juno is the wife of the Roman god Jupiter and also the goddess of finance. The percent increase from 2006 to 2011 can be calculated to be a 771.4% increase. So this blue line's where the movie releases. So from 2006 to this little peak in 2011 is 771.4. And then there's also 1919 for some reason. This is the point where I started Googling Game of Thrones characters, and apparently there's a character named Jaime, spelled Jaime, but I actually found Game of Thrones had no effect. However, the television show The Bionic Woman had a big effect on this name. It aired from 1976 to 1978. However, the character of Jamie Summers first appeared in an episode of The $6 Million Man in 1975, in which she became a popular character. She is a tennis player who is like bionic in some way. So Jaime, spelled this way, is generally the less common spelling of Jamie, spelled Jamie, which is a diminutive of James, which is a name related to the Hebrew Jacob. Jamie's a pretty unisex name at this point. I'm not sure how it came to be used femininely, and you can see that this name definitely had an impact on that. Because she first appeared in 1975, which is this point, we're going to calculate the percent increase from 1974 to the peak in 1976, which was a 2,926.3% increase. It went from probably 100, 200 in 1974 to almost 8,000. This is one of the sharpest increases I've seen. So, and if we look at Jamie, spelled Jamie, it had the same peak. But the peak was flatter and decreased slower due to it being the more common spelling. All right, this next name, I also find it very interesting, but I was listening to Sabrina Carpenter because she has a song, but that's been very popular this summer, and I got curious what the name Sabrina meant. I looked it up, and this is actually now one of my other favorite names for how it's a name, but Sabrina comes from Habron, which is the Welsh name for the River Severn, which is a river in Wales. And according to legend, it was named after a princess who drowned in it. I guess the princess would have been named Habron. Sabrina is the Latinized form of the name. There have been several fictional characters named Sabrina, starting with the play Sabrina Fair, which opened in 1953, which is this first line here. So it opened in November of 1953, but the name didn't become popular until 1955, which is likely due to the 1954 film adaptation of that play, which was just called Sabrina. It starred Audrey Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart, who were the big actors of the time. You can see that jump there. That was a 6,122.2% increase. It went from 18 to 1,120. And I mean, really, this is just over 2 years instead of 3, because the play really didn't have much an effect, because it was released in November of that year, but it was the movie. This is Audrey Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart in that movie. I don't know what this is in 1967. I know that Sabrina the Teenage Witch had comics. I couldn't really find when the comics were released, so this is probably from the comics, but I couldn't find any that were specifically released in 1966 or 67. However, in 1970, the television show Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which I believe is this one, or this might be from the 1977 one, but that show started airing, and in that first year, it had a pretty big jump, but the bigger jump came from the new Archie and Sabrina hour in 1977, when from 1976 to 1978, it had a 80.6% increase, and the percent increase from 1995 to 1996, when Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which is this live action version, aired, it was a 62.2% increase. I do expect that 2024 will see an increase in the number of Sabrinas due to Sabrina Carpenter, because it seems to me she's been very popular this summer. Due to this song, Please, Please, Please. I think she also has one called Espresso. Maybe it won't be a big jump, but I do expect it will increase in 2024. All right, my all-time favorite name for how we get this name is Tiffany. And although Tiffany first appeared in data in 1942 with Seven, the 1961 movie Breakfast at Tiffany's, which is based on a book, started its rise. And I didn't know this, but the Tiffany in the book actually refers to the jewelry store Tiffany & Co. And this movie also starred Audrey Hepburn as the main character, whose name was Holly. So Tiffany is actually a medieval name. It's the medieval form of Theophania, which is the feminine form of Theophanes, which is a Greek name meaning manifestation of God. And the name, which has been dated to the 12th century, was often given to girls born on the Epiphany, which is a day about the Magi and the baptism of Jesus, and it's January 6th. There's actually a thing called the Tiffany problem, which is when sometimes something is too realistic to the point of it sounding fake. And the specific example I've seen used other than Tiffany is getting shot in the shoulder. In movies, you see someone get shot in the shoulder and they're they're hurt, but they're still moving around, still shooting the bad guys. But if you get shot in the shoulder, there's so many important stuff in there. You're not gonna be still shooting the bad guys. You're gonna be very, very hurt. But if there was a movie where that happened, some people might call it unrealistic because they've been so primed to think that getting shot in the shoulder is no big deal as long as you get help eventually. But it's called the Tiffany problem because even though Tiffany, I don't know if it would have been a very common name, but Tiffany was an established name in the medieval ages. You can't write a medieval book that takes place then and name a character Tiffany because people will think that it's unrealistic because they associate Tiffany with the 70s and the 80s. And that's why I think this is a very interesting name, even though it's not one of my favorite names, because I associate it with the mean high school girls in an 80s movie. So the name first appeared in 1942, but I think the reason it first appeared there is because, according to the Tiffany website, the iconic location at 5th and 57th in New York City opened in 1940. So, by those first 2 years, there were just less than 5. And then 1942, you have 7. And that's starts a very slow increase, but then it gets triggered by the release of Breakfast at Tiffany's, the movie, and it just starts going up, becoming popular in the 80s. And so the percent increase from 1960 to 1962, just those first 2 years, is a 629.2% increase. But if we go from 1960 to 1982, which is this first peak, there is a 71,454.2% increase in 20 years. And so this percentage beats Madison, but it is 2 extra years. And I'm not sure if anything caused this bigger jump from 1978 to 1979, but I don't know. I mean, this one movie and Audrey Hepburn caused this to become a very, very big name a long time later. Now we're getting on to the negative trends. The first couple are going to be very bad things, and you can probably guess which names I looked up because we're starting with Adolf. So I looked it up, and according to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, it was reported in 1942 that the Nazis, led by Adolf Hitler, were going to kill all of the Jews in Europe. And so America joined the war in 1941, so this was only about a year later. But the name was already downtrending. It had peaked around World War I, but it was already downtrending, but it had kind of evened out by the late 30s. But then America learns about the Holocaust and what Hitler's really doing, and it just goes down a little further. So Adolf is an old Germanic name meaning noble wolf, and the percent decrease from 1941 to 1942 can be calculated to be a 28.9% decrease, not actually that big overall. And from 1944 to 1945, with Hitler dying in 1945, there was a 22% increase for some reason. Again, not that big, but I feel like, Hitler is just such an infamous, horrible person that it is a little surprising that there's still some, but I mean, it's a name. I feel like it's really hard to just completely kill off a name, but there's still like 5 born every couple of years. I am confused why the name kind of went up again in the post-World War II era, but it eventually died out. Also, I know Hitler's first name is Adolf with an F, but that's the German spelling, and this spelling with the PH is far more common in America, but both spellings do follow the same name trend. Next is Osama. And Osama bin Laden was the man who organized the 9/11 attacks. I was not alive in that year, but according to the FBI, they quickly figured out he was responsible. And so Osama with an O is a variant of Osama or Usama with a U, which is an Arabic name meaning lion. And the percent decrease from 2000 to 2002, which is still not even the bottom of the trend, is a 79.6% decrease. Obviously, it happened in September, so there were still like 9 months of babies being named Osama that year. And it's not a very common name in the United States because it's an Arabic name and thus they're a minority in the population. But you can see the name went down pretty fast over a couple years. It had a couple years where it was just under 10. And it's kind of been coming back the last couple years, but it's nowhere where it was before. Okay, then there's the name ISIS, and I actually learned quite a few interesting things about this name. So ISIS is a terrorist organization that by the end of 2015 was recognized internationally as a terrorist organization. But first of all, ISIS is a very old name. It's the Greek form of an Egyptian name that possibly means throne, and Isis is the god of sky and nature in Egyptian mythology. As a terrorist organization, it stands for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. So first of all, in 2015 is when they started being recognized internationally as a terrorist organization. So the percent decrease from 2014 to 2016 can be calculated to yield a 86.8% decrease here. However, when I looked this name up, I found this little increase here. And so from 1975 to 1976, there was a television series called The Secrets of ISIS. This is the main character from that. But there was a 416.7% increase from 1974 to 1976. And if we look, the name really kind of starts to pop up in like 1960. And I did some research, and that's when UNESCO begins a project to save buildings in the Philae Temple complex, which includes the Temple of Isis. And so maybe that kind of popping up in the news or something caused it to start being used as a name. The show had a little peak, but it started really being used after that, peaking in the early 2000s. Also, there is one little blip down here in 1901, and I could not find one specific event around 1901. But it is most likely that throughout this early data, there was just consistently people naming their daughters Isis, but 1901 was the only year with 5 or more. Also, there's a little picture of the Egyptian god Isis. I think this is the only product I have on here, but Alexa is the word that activates the Amazon Alexa. And so the product was released in late 2014. I do want to note that although it is called the Alexa, it can also be activated by the word Echo, which makes sense because Alexa is a name. So the product was released in late 2014, which is this point. And so Alexa is the short form of Alexandra, the feminine form of Alexander, a Greek name meaning defending man. Initially, there was an increase after the release of this product. From 2013 to 2015, there was a 47.4% increase, which is not very big overall. However, the percent decrease from 2016 to now, it has only been decreasing, is an 89.7% decrease. And the thing I've noticed that, and hopefully you're noticing this too, but the decreases are actually not as big as the increases because they tend to decrease slower, whereas a lot of the names we're looking at had like a one very quick, sharp increase that peaked very quickly and then went down just as fast. Also, it does seem that the Amazon Alexa is still very much used today. It's still very much used. People are buying it. They probably still have it. But it's not like it was a quick fad and the name's coming back. I don't know if this name will ever come back. Also, in case you're curious, I did just look up the name Siri in my data, and it actually peaked around the time the iPhone feature released. On to the next name, which is Katrina, because Hurricane Katrina was a Category 5 major hurricane, and in total, over 1,000 people died as a result of flooding and other destruction during the last week of August in 2005. So interestingly, the name saw a slight increase in 2005 itself, but the percent decrease from 2004 to 2006, if we just kind of go skim over that point, is 22.8. Not very fast, but you associate the name Katrina with the hurricane now, and so it's decreased, and it hasn't really come back. It's had a couple, just minor increases just due to variation from year to year. All right, then the other name I looked up, I don't remember why I looked this up. This might have been in the Reddit thread, was Jared, because beginning in 2000, a man named Jared Fogle became a spokesman for the Subway franchise. And in 2015, he was arrested for child porn. So Jared is a Hebrew name meaning descent, and the percent decrease from 2000 to 2015 can be calculated to be an 86.2% decrease. If the big Subway guy's named Jared, are you gonna name your kid Jared because he's the big Subway guy? I don't know, I wasn't alive then. Look up some of the ads, they're kind of weird now, knowing they're kind of even weirder now that we know the child porn thing. But yeah, I mean, 2015 hardly had an effect on that because it had already decreased so much, but it did continue going down after that. Okay, now I have 3 names where I could not find the trigger for the increase or decrease. Maybe there isn't, maybe there is one, maybe there isn't one, but my logic is that it's too sharp, too sudden, too random to be a thing that just kind of happened. Well, especially the first two, the third one not so much. But if you're watching this and you think you might know what caused the increase or decrease, leave a comment because I want to know. First one is Shawnee. And so the Shawnee are a Native American people, and Shawnee means Southern people in the Algonquin language. So I looked it up, and prior to like the colonization of the Americas, the Shawnee lived in like the Ohio area, but then they kind of dispersed into other states. Like I think there's some in Oklahoma. But anyway, as you can see, from 1989 to 1990, there was a very sharp 154.5% increase, went down in the year following, and then increased sharply again and has been declining since. So I looked up this name because I was listening to the Longest Johns that have a version of the song Shawnee Town, very catchy, and I want to know what Shawnee meant. So I looked up the meaning of the word Shawnee. And I was like, Shawnee, that sounds almost like a feminine form of the name Sean. The actual feminine form of the name Sean is Shauna, but I thought maybe matches the increase of the name Sean. It does not. Sean increased around this time, which maybe is why this was more popular here. But point is, it is not the Shawnee Town song. I mean, the version of this song was released like last year, but it was written in like the 70s. It was written in like the 70s, so maybe this is related to the Shawnee Town song. I also looked up famous people named Shawnee. I only came across one, Shawnee Smith. I looked up The Keelboat Age on Western Waters, which is a book containing the origin of the Shawnee Town song. I looked up other songs containing Shawnee. Wasn't any of those. I looked up events in Shawneetown, Illinois, which is actually, the song is written about Shawneetown, Illinois. I also looked up, do the Shawnee people use the name Shawnee as a given name? I spent a lot of time reading about their naming conventions, and it seems like the answer is no, because that's their language. It'd be like name your kid English. And so my best guess as to at least what started this is that the name started appearing in the 1940s, possibly as an appropriation of the name, but I really cannot find a reason for this giant increase. And like I said, it just seems too sharp and too sudden to just come out of nowhere. If you know, leave a comment. I want to know. I want to know what caused that. All right, next is the name Bill. So I looked up, as I mentioned, I had the president slides. And so I looked up Bill to see if Clinton's presidency had an effect. It didn't. But I discovered this strange dip and the number of Bills born between 1947 and 1959. So Bill is a nickname for William, which is a name with Germanic origins that means will helmet. So Bill is not often used as a given name. It's usually you just name your kid William and you call him Bill anyway. But William did not experience a dip at this point. It just kind of continued on. And so I tried looking up famous Bills, but I kept just getting people who were born either here or here, a couple that were born here, but I couldn't find anyone who was famous at like this time or infamous at this time. So I don't know what caused this weird dip. But here are some famous people named Bill. We have Bill Clinton, Bill Nye the Science Guy, Bill Cipher, Bill Potts from Doctor Who. And for some reason, when I Googled Bill, the Bill from Schoolhouse Rock was the first image that came up. So here's that guy. Yeah, I don't know what caused this. All right, next is Walter. I was looking at Game of Thrones characters, but I was also curious if the Breaking Bad characters had an impact. I looked up Walt and Jesse. There was no impact. But I found this sudden sharp increase in the popularity of Walter, which is a Germanic name meaning power of the army. I looked up famous people named Walter, and among them was Walter Chrysler. So, and he seemed the most promising, but he started in 1911, which is like one of these few points. And I don't know how popular, I don't know how like famous or well known he would have been. Walt Whitman was also a possibility, but he was already like long dead by then. This is Walt Whitman, and this is Walter White from Breaking Bad. And so from 1911 to 1915, there was a 266.1% increase. And this could just be like Britney, where it was there and then it just suddenly decided to start getting popular again. But I don't know, I feel like maybe there was a trigger, like maybe someone started becoming well known around here and then they started becoming really well known around here. And that's why I thought maybe Walter Chrysler, because he would have been alive here, but he would have started inventing cars or whatever around here, around, 1911. Maybe that caused an increase. Again, if you know of a famous Walter from 1911, leave a comment. All right, these last few slides are not actual names, but these are names I looked up but was relieved had no data. I started looking up some weird random things because I was curious if anyone was dumb enough to name their kid that. So first of all, Bort, if you've seen the Simpsons episode, what was it called? Like Itchy and Scratchy Land, season 6, where they're out of Bort license plates in the gift shop. No one has named their child Bort, so reasonably they should never be out of Bort license plates in the gift shop. I also looked up Hitler, luckily no data, COVID, influenza, rubella, syphilis, chlamydia, herpes, salmonella. I just started Googling STDs and common diseases. Vagina, penis, Viagra, murder, and sexy. And these are the names I looked up but was kind of horrified at data. Over 11 years between 2010 and 2023, there were 114 boys named Arson. From 2006 to 2022, in 16 years, there were 144 boys named Chaos. And over 5 years, from 2014 to 2020, there were 27 boys named Mayhem, which, if you're not familiar, is an actual crime. It's like maiming. Ransom, over 145 years, from 1880 to 2023, there have been 10 girls and 4,658 boys named Ransom. I know that 145 years is not in here, but that just means 143 years plus 2 years for girls. Also, unlike the other names here, Ransom does have a longer history, and it's not actually a crime. I'm not sure like how it really started to be a name because it doesn't come from a last name, it just comes from the word. So I looked up these first 3 names, and then I looked up violent boys' names, and I found the remaining ones. But then when you Google violent girls' names, you do not get similar results. You get girls' names with villainous meanings or fierce names or badass names for girls. Like, why do people want their sons to be violent? Why are you naming your kids Shooter and Dagger and Riot with a Y and Riot with a Y and 2 T's? Like, look, these are not very many, but like, why are you naming your child Shooter? Please don't name your child a crime. Ransom is more acceptable. It has a history, and at least it's not an actual crime. It's just related to a crime. And these are the 3 names I looked up, but was a little surprised had no data, especially after the last slide. So, anarchy. So actually, I did do a PowerPoint night with my friends where I was making up names, where I was gendering the name, like words, and I was gendering crimes. And I do think arson, good name for a girl, Ari for short. Chaos is pretty gender neutral. I think Mayhem would be a better name for a girl because then you can call her May for short. Anarchy would be a cool name if it did not mean anarchy. I was surprised there were no kids named Cloak. I mean, like Dagger, there's a couple kids named Dagger, but there's no one named Cloak. I have literally decided that my next generation of Sims and my Sims legacy, my next heir is named Muffin, and she's gonna live in Windenburg in a big dark and gloomy Windenburg Tudor house, and I've already decided she's gonna have twins, and I'm gonna name them Cloak and Dagger. Also, no one's naming their kid Cave. Like, that's a weird name, but like, there was a congressman from like 1840 named Cave Johnson, and Cave Johnson is also the name of the guy in Portal who does all like the PA announcements. In conclusion, Who had the biggest impact? Overall, positive things had larger impacts than negative things, since it is quite difficult to take a fairly well-known name and just completely wipe it off the map. We wouldn't really remember the names that this happened to. But if we look at the biggest percent increases over the shortest amounts of times, we have these names: Jolene, Jaime, Britney, the Britney Spears spelling, Sharona, Lolita, Shirley, Sabrina, Elsa, Madison, and ISIS in the 1970s context of ISIS. To the right, I have the name, the percent increase, and the number of years it was calculated for. Notice how each name is feminine except for the presidents. I mean, most of the names I've presented here are feminine because I like feminine names and I think about them more. Maybe people just name their girls after TV more? I don't know. Anyway, here are all the names and the numbers. What kind of names had the biggest increases? The names with older contexts had the biggest increases. The ones that are more related to the last couple years did not have as big of increases, and this is likely due to the fact that there was just less content and no internet growing, prior to maybe like the 1950s and 60s when television started becoming popular. If it's 1884 and the election is coming up, you're going to see Grover Cleveland's name everywhere. Probably, I'm assuming. Like probably posters and billboards. And if it's 1954 and there are fewer movies and fewer movie stars, you're going to see the newest sensation, Audrey Hepburn in Sabrina. I mean, even the name Audrey increased that year. It's difficult to compare increases over varying amounts of years, but I'm going to say that these people had the largest impacts that I found so far. Audrey Hepburn as Sabrina Fairchild in the 1954 movie Sabrina, she caused an over 6,000% increase over like 2 years. And Lindsay Wagner as Jamie Summers from 1976 to 1978 on the Bionic Woman. She also had an increase in the thousands. And these two, they were very short-lived, but they were also very sharp increases. And if we look at the male names at the presidents, Woodrow Wilson, who was elected president in 1912, he had over 1,000, and Barack Obama, who was elected president in 2008 and served 2 terms, both of them served 2 terms, he also had an increase close to 1,000. But these are short impacts. So who made the biggest cultural impact? Obviously, Tiffany is one of them. And Tiffany became a very popular name, but it never broke into the top 10. It was always, I think its highest it ever was 13th. It never broke into the top 10. So who had the biggest cultural impact? It was Daryl Hannah as Madison. As we discussed, the name Madison only increased for girls as a result of the 1984 movie Splash, in which the main character chooses a name for herself based on a street sign. And it may not have increased as rapidly as the names that were already established in some way, but over 18 years, Madison rose to the number 2 name across the United States. And so the impact on baby names of everyone else here is relatively short-lived, but Madison is a lasting impact, similar to Tiffany, but it got even more popular than Tiffany. And this is due to the fact that Madison managed to break into the top 10, almost becoming number 1, but it lingered for a while. Shirley became number 2 as well, but it just shot up to number 2 and then disappeared just as quickly. Madison quickly rose. It's like a staple of Gen Z. I mean, this name will never not be one of my go-to fun facts for names. It's Madison, Roxanne, Tiffany, and Sabrina. All right, and that's the end of my slideshow. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something from it about how fun names and data and name trends can be. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, I will link my other name videos in the description.